Peace and welcome. Today we are taking a look at different soundtracks that are from the same game, not ports. We won't mention an arcade game that was ported to a home console or anything like that. We are specifically talking about games from the same console but have different music in different regions. You could call it oddly unfamiliar. Let's get this underway. First up, we have Superman for the 8-bit Nintendo, the American version versus the Japanese version. One huge difference that I noticed right away, the Japanese game has at least 2 Superman themes, with it also being sprinkled throughout the soundtrack, while the American game doesn't even have a single Superman theme. I assume it was taken out of the American game because the copyright owner, in this case John Williams, asked for too much money and the publisher Kemco was forced to say no, this isn't Capcom or some other company with a big budget. To make matters worse, when Superman was released in America, a handful of the themes were taken directly from Indora no Hikari, a Famicom RPG released only in Japan. Here's a few examples. Indora no Hikari, or translated as Light of Indora, was developed by Kemco, the same company as Superman. It was released in 1987, also the same as Superman. The Light of Indora soundtrack was composed by Hiroyuki Masuno, again, the same as Superman. So the themes aren't stolen, he just recycled them. My guess is they probably thought nobody would ever really notice. The Japanese release of the game had an all-new soundtrack, no borrowed themes from other games, and with multiple Superman themes, while the American version removed the Superman themes and used a bunch of themes from another game. They didn't even change the themes at all. This entry is a little bit disappointing to say the least. Our next entry comes from Afterburner 3 on the Sega CD, the American soundtrack versus the Japanese soundtrack from the Mega CD. The third game in the Afterburner series, this is actually a port of an arcade game released only in Japan, titled Strike Fighter, which happens to be a sequel to G-Lock, Air Battle, which is a spin-off to the original Afterburner series. So in actuality, this is a port of a spin-off that had its name changed to be a sequel in the series it was a spin-off of. And during that process, they changed the soundtrack. The American soundtrack has more electric guitars, while the Japanese soundtrack seems a little more chill. To be honest, I prefer the Japanese version. However, I do understand why they made the change. They seem to be trying for an action-packed game, so themes that are more amped up make sense. Some of the themes remained, such as the title screen and one named Lunar Ground, which had a typo in the Japanese version but was fixed for later releases. The soundtrack was composed by Soul Inc. I don't have much information on who or what that is, but that's what it says in the staff roll at the end of the game. Next is Tetris Blast on the Game Boy, in Japan known as Super Bombliss. The two soundtracks we will compare come from the American version and the Japanese version. Super Bombliss was first released in March of 1995, while Tetris Blast wasn't released until January of 1996. The Japanese soundtrack is rather limited in comparison. It has around 6 full themes, while the American soundtrack doubles that and has around 12 full themes, 5 of which are from the Japanese game. So it's really only missing one piece of music, while adding more than a handful of themes. I think it's safe to say, in this case, the American soundtrack is far superior. Composed by multiple people, including Masaru Tajima, who still works for Nintendo to this day. You may know of him from any number of games. Most notable may just be all of the Pokemon games. Also, Masaya Kuzume, who doesn't work for Nintendo anymore, and his last work was on Super Smash Bros. Brawl in 2008. Yuka Tsujiyoko, a former Nintendo employee and now a freelance composer. She has worked on quite a few Nintendo games, and I dare say if you have played a Fire Emblem game, then you have heard her work. Up next, we have Castlevania III, Dracula's Curse, the American version versus the Japanese version. We have talked about this one before, as it has been featured in a few of our top 10s. Both soundtracks use the same melodies and at the same tempo. However, you will notice a few differences. For one, the Japanese game uses a different sound chip, so some of the sounds are different. Plus, it has 3 more channels, for a total of 8 channels of audio. If you want to check them out, I would recommend the Castlevania Anniversary Collection. It comes with a bunch of games and even includes the Japanese versions, so you can try both games and listen for yourself. Plus, it's available on all current platforms, so you can play on the TV, the PC, or even portable. The game has multiple composers that were involved. I think all of their styles blended well together. There's not a huge noticeable difference when going from theme to theme. When listening to the Famicom version and that VRC6 sound, it has a smoother feel than the American NES. However, one of my favorite things to do on this one is combine the two soundtracks. Since they are all the same melodies and the same tempo, they combine perfectly. You can get the extra channels of the VRC6 combined with the nostalgic sound of the NES. We have one honorable mention today, and it comes from Mega Man 6. The Japanese game used a different theme for the pre-title sequence, which sounds like this. And the American version sounds like this. Last on our list today comes from Sonic CD, the Japanese and European versions versus the American version. Yet again, the Western devs felt the need to change a soundtrack. It doesn't happen so much anymore, but it seems a little more common back in the day. The original soundtrack was composed by Naofumi Hataya and Masafumi Ogata. You may know them from their work on multiple Sonic games. The remade American soundtrack was composed by Spencer Nielsen, who composed one of my favorite soundtracks in the Echo the Dolphin CD. David Young, who composed for the Sega CD as well as the Sega Saturn, and the last composer was Mark Sterling Crew, who only worked on 2 games, but both happened to be Sonic. I grew up playing the American game, so I'm used to hearing that one, and I do enjoy it. With that being said, I also enjoy the Japanese soundtrack. In this case, I am fine with both, and I really don't mind which one is playing. The Japanese soundtrack has a few tracks that almost sound like Hideki Naganuma, so I do like that, but then also Spencer Nilsson was involved on the American soundtrack, so I do like that. There's many more games with regional differences when it comes to the soundtrack. Some only have an additional track or 2, while others may change the entire thing. We may cover some more in a future episode, but for now, shout out to gold level patrons Bearsona and Quantum X. I am ICC, thanks for watching, peace.